Well, hello. Welcome to Orchid Bloom's podcast. Welcome back, bloomers. I am your host, Orchid Brown, with the Orchid Blooms podcast. You can find me on TikTok, X, as well as Blue Skies at Orchid I Brown. This week's episode will be on ancestral trauma. Now, what is it? Ancestral trauma, also known as intergenerational or generational trauma, refers to the idea that the emotional and psychological impact of past trauma can be passed down through families, affecting the mental and emotional well-being of descendants who did not directly experience the trauma. Now, I wanted to do this podcast episode because I've been thinking about it for a while. This idea kind of started with an episode that I did in 2021 called Generational Trauma with Dr. Tiffany Ross. By the way, Dr. Tiffany Ross is amazing. I love her immensely. She is great. So definitely go and listen to part 1 of Generational Trauma, as well as part 2, Generational Trauma and Trauma Bonding with Dr. Tiffany Ross. Dr. Tiffany Ross is a psychotherapist, so I thought going into the discussion of generational trauma would be best to have with an actual psychotherapist, someone who has invested her time in helping people through their traumas as well as generational traumas. Now, ancestral traumas I find is connected to generational trauma. They're kind of the same thing. And even when I just kind of broken down what it was, it's quite similar. But I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of break down ancestral trauma, generational trauma, and intergenerational trauma, since they are so much alike and they are also the same thing, in my opinion, with this podcast episode, because it was a discussion that Dr. Tiffany Ross and I had with part 1 and part 2, and how generational trauma kind of affects our decisions and mistakes that we've made in our lives. And even if we don't consider it a mistake, it's still something that we learned from. It's a learned lesson. But I still wanted to kind of go over it one more time and then also kind of break down some things we had not talked about in those 2 podcast episodes. Ancestral trauma or generational trauma suggests that the unresolved emotional pain and psychological wounds of past generations can continue to influence the present, even if the current generation has not experienced the original trauma. This transmission of trauma can occur through various mechanisms, including behavioral and relational patterns, environmental factors, and epigenetics. For behavioral and relational patterns, parents who have experienced trauma may struggle with parenting skills or have difficulty forming healthy attachments, which can negatively impact their children. For environmental factors, the environment and conditions in which a family lives can be influenced by past trauma, creating a cycle of stress and adversity. Epigenetics, some research suggests that traumatic experience can lead to changes in DNA that can be passed down to future generations. Ancestral trauma can stem from a wide range of traumatic events, such as historical events, which would include war, slavery, genocide, colonization, and other forms of systematic oppression, personal traumas such as abuse, neglect, violence, and other forms of trauma within the family, natural disasters such as flood, earthquakes, and pandemics. Descendants of traumatized individuals may experience a range of emotional and psychological symptoms, which would include anxiety, depression, and PTSD, difficulty with relationships and attachments, low self-esteem and feeling of worthlessness, substance abuse, and other maladaptive behaviors. So I'm now going to throw in a note right here because a lot of people may not believe that ancestral or generational or intergenerational trauma does exist, but the note is there is now converging evidence supporting the idea that offsprings are affected by parental trauma exposure occurring before their birth and possibly even prior to their conception. Let's continue. There may be learned behaviors that become status quo within a family. So an example of this is intergenerational abuse, where a cycle of abuse continues from one generation to the next. For instance, perhaps a woman was abused as a child and then she went on to abuse her children when she had a child, and so on. In other situations, there may be some examples of behaviors that are passed down, such as if a man was taught by his father that men should not show emotions and that people shouldn't talk about their feelings, then this man could pass along the same mentality to his kids, and they could pass it along to their kids. And this is kind of a topic that we've heard a few podcasters talk about, is masculine toxicity. And they talk about this in their podcast episode, how they were kind of raised to not show emotion, to always be strong. And I can relate to that as a Black woman, because we are told that as well in our culture, that we aren't supposed to show vulnerabilities, that we are to remain strong, like your vulnerabilities are your weaknesses and people will take advantage of that. I mean, I don't disagree. I have met so many people who have tried to take my weaknesses for their strengths and feel that they were somehow superior to me. They could get away with what they're doing and they can continue to do bad things to me and it would just be okay, because of the traumas that most Black women have been through for centuries now. And due to that, it kind of gives these predators permission or authority to do that, which I disagree with. So who you meet after you fucked around and find out is your problem. Your problem. So, I mean, my parents and grandparents weren't wrong when they said that. You have to be careful who you show your vulnerability to, because not everyone is on your side. Most people are your ops. But breaking away from that, especially when the truth is being shown to you that your parents were right, you need to remain strong. You really do need to, society has made it so that what is said, what has been passed down is true. Now, how do you break away from that and be your authentic self and feel comfortable being vulnerable and not allow someone to take your power away from you? That is very difficult. So I really do appreciate these podcasters who come out and they talk about their experiences, and they also talk about, how not being vulnerable has destroyed a lot of relationships that were maybe meaningful to them. And at the time, they didn't realize what they were doing, but this was a learned behavior. It was something that they were taught at a young age. I fully understand and support it. I do. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. I am glad that people are listening and really looking at their behaviors and looking at the decisions that they're making and realizing that that barrier that they put up, because that's what they were taught to do, that barrier that you have put in place to protect you, to keep you sane, to keep you safe and secure, has now affected your relationships with the most important people in your life. And that is dangerous. There has to be a balance. And mind you, I am still learning that balance, learning to discern who are the people that are for me and who are the people that are against me. So it's a long journey to realize that, to not think of everyone as your enemy and everyone cannot be trusted. it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. Parents have good intentions, and some want to save their children by passing down a mentality that they have learned and their families warned them about. What I have experienced is the fear behind it, the unhealed trauma that they can't free themselves from. It's suffocating and it hurts because you can see and feel their pain as they talk about it. There is no denying that family trauma and unhealthy behaviors in families can impact you. In some situations, if you know your culture and family history, they can be some pretty clear hints that your family could be dealing with some ancestral trauma. Even though I know my culture and family history, nothing had prepared me for my experiences, all the situations that I have been through. What I have seen and experienced within my family left me in a place of feeling nothing, just in shock and just not knowing what to do. I was not sure how to react. I did not have a good answer or solution, which is really not a good place to be in. It was a problem I could not wrap my mind around, and I just did not know what to do except to just step back, sit back, and just watch it all play out. That was really all the tools I had in this situation. Major oppression, discrimination, and marginalization can result in intergenerational trauma. This is common in certain groups who experience collective trauma, such as Caribbean people, Native American people, Asian American people, Latin American people. These are the 4 races that have experienced the most trauma in history. Some examples of what they've experienced is colonization, slavery, violence, ongoing racial discrimination, refugees, genocide, wars, and stressors related to migration. There are other races in the world that have experienced these things, and I am just choosing not to mention them because most of them are currently going through that, especially with Ukraine and other war-stricken countries out there in the world. They're now experiencing stressors of migration. They may be experiencing wars, genocide, and they are refugees that are coming from new places that are coming into America or Canada or Europe, right? So I'm choosing not to mention them because their struggle is still ongoing and it's not over for them. It isn't. They have a lot more that they're going to go through and understand. This will now turn into ancestral trauma for their lineage going forward. They are aware of who they are based on the details I have listed. And there's really nothing that they can do about correcting that right now since the trauma is still ongoing. Outside of historical events, we also experience traumatic events personally, which is called ACE, so Adverse Childhood Experiences, which could lead to inherited trauma for offsprings. So examples of these are having a family member who attempts suicide or dies by suicide. I have met someone who has experienced that in their childhood. And it was devastating for this gentleman because when he was explaining it to me, it kind of explains why he ended up choosing substance abuse later on in life, just to kind of get through everything that he had experienced. He literally walked into his garage as a child to his father hanging from the garage ceiling. That's traumatizing because kids don't just grow up not loving their parents. They love their parents. They don't hate them. So when you see this and realize that this was the last memory of your father and you'll never see them again. That's devastating. That's an image that child is going to grow up seeing in his mind forever. To the day he dies, that is what he's going to see. And then after that, his mother gets diagnosed with severe cancer and he has to watch her suffer and die. That is brutal. But the one thing I can say about this gentleman is that he remains positive. He chooses to be positive. He chooses to try to enjoy the life that he has. And thankfully, he has withdrawn from severe, substance abuse. But I don't think the substance abuse is completely gone. But I really admire his love for life and wanting to enjoy it and wanting to live and wanting to feel. And he's kind to his friends. And since he has no family, because now, I'm finding out that his sister is now going through the exact same thing his mother did. And that is brutal, very brutal. He's still choosing to be kind to people. He's still choosing to be well with people and facilitate friendships and, giving good advice and just being there for people, even while he is struggling with what he's going through and the constant reminder of losing his family in the way that he's losing them and still wanting love. That's one thing I really appreciated about him, is that he was still looking for that love, that one true love for him specifically. And so I hope he found it. He's still with his girlfriend. I really hope that, she is it and they are completely happy together. They look great together. They're always smiling. So, I'm going to stop talking about that. It's just remembering him and what he's been through just kind of puts a smile on my face. The next one on the list would be being sexually assaulted in childhood, which a lot of people have experienced that. I wish I could say that, it's a 1 in 5 case, but it really is not. Really is not. Then there's the other trauma of childhood trauma in children in foster care systems. We've heard so much about this that it really should be studied. It really should be. So losing access to a family member who is in prison or jail, that's another personal trauma. Losing access to a parent due to separation. Of course, you end up in a foster care system and other wonderful things, which wonderful is my sarcastic way of saying this is not very good experience. Living in a household where a family member has a mental health problem, living in a household where a family member abuses substance such as alcohol or drugs, witnessing violence, being a victim of abuse, neglect, or violence. So there is just a long list of personal traumas that individual people face every day. Every day. There's not one person that I have met or spoken to that has not experienced a trauma. Not one, especially in their childhood. So my thoughts on this list is that so many people experience these things and we can't protect our children from all of this. We just can't. I have not met a person who does not have trauma or have experienced secondhand trauma. There are so many beautiful things that has come out of trauma that people have experienced. These people go on to help others create a community to help people who have similar traumas to their own. These communities build each other up and support as well as encourage healing. No one can avoid life lessons. No one can. And I wish I could, use this podcast episode to say, hey, you can free yourself and you can free your children. But it's a very long process and no one has that sort of control over life. No one. Another thing that even I've experienced is that not a lot of families share their traumas from their past or their childhood with their children or their adult children. There is a universal language to stuff it down inside of you and never speak of it again, which is dangerous because it can cause you a lot of emotional and psychological damage, and which of course leads to mental health issues, but also because The only people that are protected by silence are the abusers or the predators. It does not protect the victims. So I don't believe in shoving it down and not talking about this. And, you know, if you listen to some of the episodes that I did with Dr. Tiffany Ross, she even explained, you know, a traumatic childhood experience that she had experienced, and how, you know, her family had dealt with it. And to, you know, for her being an adult, you know, a wife, and having children of her own, she had to kind of face those ancestral trauma, well, her own personal trauma, as well as ancestral trauma. And that's something that she talks about in part 1. And she had to kind of face her mother and tell her mother how she truly feels, even though her mother didn't want to hear it. Her mother wanted to just kind of have it go away, wanted her to be silent about it. And a lot of families do this to children. They don't want to deal with it. They want to act like it never happened, but it didn't really happen to you. It happened to your child. Only for her to then realize that, not realize, I guess the conversation was had where her mother had expressed to her that that happened to her as well, and she had to stuff it down and act like it never happened either. So you should do it too. It helps. It's not a laughing matter, but whenever I hear these stupid things, I'm kind of like, oh my God. So, you know, and that's kind of the reason why Dr. Tiffany Ross decided that she wanted to be a psychotherapist, to kind of help people in these types of situations that she has been through. And that's what I mean by beautiful things do come out of these types of trauma. You go out there and you help others who've experienced it with you, and be there for them the way that somebody wasn't there for you. So good things do come out of it. Books are written out of it, and, you know, connects the worlds to a single trauma. So many things. Music are written as well due to traumatic experiences, and billions of people connect with that song. So beautiful things do come out of it. Beautiful things do come out of it. My mother attempted to face her parents and talk about, you know, what her traumas in childhood had done to her. And I felt for her, it just kind of reopened the womb, and she did not get the satisfaction of not even an I'm sorry about what happened, because they've been through it too. And for them, it was like, it's great that you're coming to me telling me this stuff, but I still got my own childhood shit that I need to deal with. If I can't even fix what's happened to me, what makes you think I can come and give that to you? So it was just hurt parties on all fronts. And no one got the satisfaction that they needed from any conversation. There was no closeness there, you know, like you see in the movies where someone comes over and they tell their parents, like, this is what's happened to them and this is how it completely derailed their lives. And, you know, the mother and the father comes together and they hug their child and they're like, we're so sorry, we're here for you. It is not like that in the real world. Not for many people. Not for many people, but I'm really glad that, you know, these movies are out here trying to show parents how they're supposed to behave. It just most of the time does not go that way. It doesn't. So some other symptoms of ancestral traumas are feeling emotions like anger, guilt, sadness, or shame, feeling helpless and numb, having otherwise unexplained symptoms like headaches, fatigue, and nausea, hyper arousal or being easily startled, wanting to withdraw or isolate from loved ones, having difficulty concentrating, or having trouble sleeping. So these are some other symptoms to add on to the few that I dropped in the beginning of this podcast episode. Now, epigenetics refers to how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes like mutations, epigenetics changes are reversible and do not change the sequence of DNA basis, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence. I know I'm going into an area that most of us do not have a knowledge base on. I know I'm not a scientist, but I still wanted to include it in a podcast episode, and maybe some of you will understand and maybe some of us won't. But regardless, I still wanted to touch on it. So the study of heritable changes in genes expression without alterations to the DNA sequence plays a significant role in understanding how ancestral trauma can impact future generations, suggesting that trauma expressed by ancestors can influence the way genetics are expressed in their descendants. Now let's talk about how trauma and epigenetics connect. So the first point is trauma can trigger epigenetics modifications, particularly in genes related to stress response and mental health. Studies suggest that childhood trauma can lead to alterations in methylation patterns in sperm, which may induce intergenerational effects. Some researchers indicate that a mother's trauma, even if it occurs during childhood, may lead to epigenetic changes within the DNA in her eggs, impacting the mental health of her children. Some examples of research. So a 2015 study found that the children of Holocaust survivors had epigenetic changes to a gene linked to cortisol levels, a hormone involved in the stress response. In 2019, studies with male veterans, war veterans from Australia, found that DNA methylation patterns in the sperm of veterans with PTSD differs from those without the condition, and those changes were linked to mental health conditions in the veterans' children. Understanding the role of epigenetics in intergenerational trauma can help us develop more effective interventions to address the long-term effects of trauma. It also highlights the importance of addressing trauma in the present to prevent its transmission to future generations. Now, I would like to end this podcast episode by talking about how to break the cycle of ancestral trauma, which is to recognize and address ancestral trauma is crucial for breaking the cycle of trauma and promoting healing within families and communities. This can include seeking therapy, learning about family history, building healthy relationships, promoting community healing. So community healing meaning working together to address the root cause of trauma and create a more just and equitable world can help break the cycle of trauma. Now, this concludes the podcast episode. I really do hope that what we've discussed in this podcast episode will help a lot of people understand ancestral trauma and maybe even understand what they are going through that maybe does not make any sense to them, because life is just like that. So I wanted to thank you all for supporting the Orchid Blooms podcast. Take this time to subscribe, follow, don't forget to rate and leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Subscribe and follow our social media pages, which is Orchid Bloom's YouTube channel, The Ambitious Obsession Network on Facebook, at The Ambitious Ops on Twitter, at The Ambitious Net on Instagram. So don't forget, share your favorite podcast episode with your family and friends, and I hope you have a splendid day.